Welcome to the Ask Sensei Tony podcast, where Sensei will address your questions about life from a cosmic perspective. Please subscribe and ask a question at AskSenseiTony.com to find out more about studying with Sensei privately, becoming a part of our spiritual community, and training to become a mindful minister of oneness in our seminary. We hope you enjoy this episode and find it helpful.
Hi everyone, I'm Sensei Tony. And today's question comes from Paul. And Paul asked, "Dear Sensei Tony, what do I do if someone falsely accuses me of something and then spreads that false accusation through social media?" Wow. Thank you, Paul. That's a good question. I think if you live long enough, someone somewhere will accuse you of something falsely. And, it could be something very small, like, did you take my my Pop-Tart? To maybe something that they're alleging is criminal in nature. So these extremes that we experience that stuff. And the first thing I'll say is it can happen to anyone. Anyone can be falsely accused of something. And certainly it's pretty easy to go into history and find important figures in the human story of great characters who were falsely accused. I think of Socrates. One could think of Christ. One could think of Buddha. And so in the Buddhist version, and some people think, well, if I'm really smart, someone's not going to do that to me. It's just like somebody lying to you about something, or somebody lying about you in some way. That if you're a certain kind of person, that would never happen. But the fact of the matter is that it can, unfortunately. So, in the story of the Buddha, for example, his own disciples, some of his own disciples, plotted to not only frame him for a murder, but made an attempt on his life. And in fact, some scholars believe that maybe the way that the historical Buddha Shakyamuni died, which was that he ate some, either, depending on your orientation, he either ate some bad barbecue or he ate some bad mushrooms, that it was either unintentional or intentional. Because, he was challenging the status quo and challenging ideas that would become encased in caste systems and so forth. So, there was a time where his not only his disciple, but his cousin, Devadatta, kills a prostitute and plants this prostitute outside where he lives, Shakyamuni is staying, and at this sort of ashram center that's been set up for him by a local king, chieftain, and tries to frame him for the murder of this woman. So it can happen to anybody. It really doesn't matter how enlightened you are or how good a person you are. It doesn't matter. Somebody can say things about you that are false and make accusations. And unfortunately, we live in a climate today where people are pretty much guilty until proven innocent. And honestly, unless this happened to you, you don't realize how awful this is. And we really need, I think, those of us that are trying to help people to become more awake and more conscious, and I don't mean that in any political way, I mean that in a spiritual way. We really need to emphasize this, because one of the beautiful things about our imperfect but still, I believe, very good legal system is that you are innocent until proven guilty. And again, it doesn't mean there aren't what people might call injustices. No, of course there are, and unjust decisions. So there are injustices, unjust decisions. That's the term. As you've listened to my Dharma talks, I'm not a big fan of the word justice. But because I think it points towards a form of perfectionism that really isn't helpful to us. But I do think that our legal system is based on some good ideals that hopefully work out better than not. And in most cases, although I know that, it's heavily affected by how well a person, let's say in a criminal setting or a civil setting, how well a person's represented by their attorney, and the biases that judges or juries can have. So it's not perfect by any means, and a lot of people get mistreated. But I think the essence of the system is good, and one of the hallmarks of that is that you are innocent until proven guilty. And so we need to really emphasize that when something happens and somebody says, "Oh, so and so did this," or what have you, it's really important that we use the word allegedly, and then hopefully the facts will weigh out. And the thing is that when someone is willing to condemn you before you've even had a fair hearing, they're probably not going to have their minds changed by the data and the facts that come out. So I think that's the first thing you have to recognize, that when someone does that to you, however light or heavy it is, so you said about social media, your first instinct is to react to it by defending yourself. And I do believe you have the right to defend yourself, and that you should defend yourself. But how you defend yourself, I think, is important. So, for example, if somebody says something about you that is false, and, the first thing, especially if they're sharing on social media, the first thing I would do is talk to an attorney and find out what your legal rights are in that particular situation. The second thing I would do is really consider whether it's worth engaging or not. Because if you don't say anything, you can say, well, people will make up their own minds. But honestly, in my experience, people tend to make up their own minds anyway. So there may be many times where it's just not worth getting into. But in some cases, you do have to say something or do something. And in those cases, you should do that with the guidance of folks that, with some kind of legal counsel, I think would be the best way to go in that regard. So the bottom line is, though, you can't control what people say or think about you. You have very limited control over that. And particularly if you have any kind of public sort of presence. So what do you do about that? Well, I think the bigger question is, how does it impact us? How does it make us feel? And we feel betrayed, we feel wronged, we feel anger, we feel all kinds of stuff. And I think what we have to do is work through those feelings using a mindfulness process like what we do in the 4 directions system of mindfulness. We have a very specific process called the 4 questions that allows us to take a situation and all the feelings coming out of it, both physically and emotionally. And then we look at the thought creating those strong feelings, and those strong feelings are the strongest feeling. And then we take that thought apart using 4 questions that address it directly. And when you do it correctly, you should feel and experience a shift in a positive way. So if you're feeling really angry or feeling really anxious or upset, if it's done correctly, you should feel better. and because your thoughts are clear. So when your thoughts are clear, better feelings follow. So that's the thing to go through with it. Otherwise, I think, and I'm going to say this from a martial arts point of view. As a martial artist, I am not a pacifist, because it depends on how you define the terms. So I always think it's important to define your terms. Pacifism for me is the idea that no matter what happens, I won't fight back. That no matter what occurs, I won't fight back. I don't really think there are many true pacifists, and I think sometimes those who are true pacifists became so because they really didn't have any power to defend themselves at that juncture. But I also honor people that say they'll do it, but I don't know of anyone. I remember one time I was having this conversation with a friend of mine who was Quaker, and he said that he was a pacifist. And then I asked him, I said, well, if somebody broke into your home and tried to harm your wife or your child, you mean you wouldn't do anything to stop them? And of course he said, no, I would try to stop them. And yet he was still holding up this ideal of pacifism. And I just think that's unrealistic. And with respect to my friend and respect to Quakers everywhere, of course, I've always had a good relationship with them as a community. Why hold up an unrealistic ideal? It just creates a sense of perfectionism that will only keep you in suffering and only further a sort of dualistic attitude. So I think it's better to let that go. And so, yeah, you have the right to defend yourself, and you should defend yourself, and you should defend yourself as strongly as you need, and never allow anyone to treat you in a way that would be detrimental to your well-being. I just think that you should always be very mindful of doing that, and that you, in the martial arts example, like the better you are as a martial artist, then the idea is that you would not be as inclined to create as much pain in your defense. So let me give you an example. So let's say someone attacks you, and they attack you by, punching at you or striking at you or grabbing you in some way. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to just sort of defend yourself the best way you can, and arms will flail and things will happen, and who knows what the outcome will be. If they're bigger and stronger than you, then you'll probably lose. A person who's beginning martial art and they're learning some basic techniques, and they get pretty good at that. And it depends on the martial art too, because a lot of martial arts are more about the cultivation of character, which I think is an important quality of martial art. But they're not so much emphasizing the role of what the place should be in terms of self-defense, let's say. So if you have so I think it's important for people early on to know how to defend themselves as best as they can. But if you have someone that does that kind of thing, and they just have some very basic skills, and they have certain basic strengths, but they don't necessarily have a high level of skill, and they're not used to a lot of combat situations, then they're going to probably react a lot harder than they need to. And they're going to probably create more pain and hurt than maybe the situation requires, because they don't have the experience. But the idea is that the more the better you get at the martial arts, the less violent your defense has to be. And so, you want to get to a place where you can stop conflict just using, your presence or your words, or ki, the shout, kia. And that will always be possible. Sometimes you'll have to use tougher ways to defend yourself. But yes, I'm not a pacifist. I know I do believe in nonviolence, which means that I don't think violence should ever be a first way of handling anything, regardless of the situation. I think that you should always try to find nonviolent solutions to any problem, and that violence in any way should only be a last resort. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't strike first sometimes. If you strike first, that means that you're just using your defense to preempt an attack once you've exhausted every other way you can think of to preempt the attack. So I'm really sorry this has happened to you. It sucks, and it's just something that's so unfair. And but that's what I would do. I would look at the situation, talk to a legal counsel, and see, because they put it on social media, see if there's any recourse you have, or get some wisdom from them on that perspective, and then deal with your own feelings around it. Don't equivocate. Defend yourself, and defend yourself in the hopefully the most mindful and strong way you can. And you have the right to do that. You have the right to defend yourself, and you have the right to speak or not speak. That's also your right. But work through the feelings that you're having, because that's the stuff. The suffering that it creates is going to come from within you, not from outside. Not from outside of you, but from within you. So work through those feelings, and hopefully you will use this experience to change the way you look at others who have been accused of something, and not be as quick to judge them. And I will finish this by saying that, there's a reason why all the great spiritual teachers of the human record have had one big teaching that they are across the board common in, and that's non-judgmentalism. Jesus talks about do not judge others, lest you be judged. Buddha speaks at great length about not judging others, and not, when you judge others, you just dig a pit for yourself, and that you're just creating suffering for yourself. And it's so important. In fact, I often tell people, they say, well, what's the best spiritual practice I have? And I would say, well, the first one would be gratitude, and the second one is non-judgmentalism. Yeah. And if you've ever been accused of something unfairly, and regardless of the outcome, whether the outcome turned out good, and everybody realized that person was lying about you, or it didn't work out that way, and everybody still had questions in their mind, and there was no way you could fully defend yourself. You were maybe even wrongly judged. What it does do is it changes you in a way that you hopefully become less judgmental yourself, so that when you realize when someone is accused of something, that it's an alleged situation. Even if there's a smoking gun, it's an alleged situation. And that hopefully you will always support and strengthen the idea that we need to know all the facts, no matter how much the society or the police are pressured to try to come up with some kind of result. And again, I'm talking about something heavy. It's maybe criminal, but it can happen. It can happen in all kinds of spectrums, as we talked about. And in your case, where someone accuses you of something unfairly or incorrectly, and now they've spread it on social media. Man, I don't think people realize how social media is so damaging to people. I mean, it has a lot of wonderful things about it too, but it has the potential to really, for those who have the intention to harm people. I won't have anything to do with it. I mean, so non-judgment, I didn't want to go too far off there before I talk about that. One of the ways to cultivate non-judgmentalism is meditation. Mm-hmm. So when you learn to meditate, you learn to observe your thoughts and feelings and sensations by anchoring yourself in your body using the breath in some fashion. And when you do that, you learn to just observe. And when you're observing things, you learn that you don't want to be discriminatory or judgmental. So if a thought you have feeling of sensation seems to be triggered by some thought or belief that is judgmental, you want to sort of like, just take a deep breath and let it go. And it'll come like waves. And thoughts will come like waves, sensations and feelings will come like waves. And what you want to do is sort of be the calm in the midst of all of that. And whenever that stuff comes through, when you find yourself attached to something, you won't be grasping at that thought that appears. And if you do, you just take a deep breath and then gently go back to observing. Likewise, if something comes up that you have an aversion to and you want to push it away, then do the same thing. Take a deep breath and bring yourself back to just observing. So meditation is a great way to cultivate non-judgmental attitude, if it's understood in that context. The other way to be non-judgmental is go back into your own history and see when you've been judged unfairly, or even when you were judged for something that you did do, a mistake you made, and kind of go there to create a sense of grace in the way you respond to situations. And it's why the Buddha emphasized the idea of suffering as the easiest way for us to experience oneness, because it's such a common denominator for all of us. Such a common denominator. And when we experience that common denominator, what we do when we're being judged unfairly, or like I said, even if we did make some mistake or whatever, it helps us to realize no one wants to be in that position of being judged. And so it's better if we don't, but the easiest way to learn how not to be judgmental is to go back to a place when you were in that position. And that's kind of that idea of oneness, where you're kind of letting yourself see the other person as a part of you and their experience being your part. And you're a lot less judgmental. In fact, I would tell you that because, like in my career, I spent a lot of time with people in prisons and things like that, and halfway house. When you're in that kind of situation, you become a lot less judgmental because you've been in the docket, as the Brits say, and it's no fun. But why? Why do they emphasize that? Because the other reason they emphasize that is not only because we can experience compassion that comes from recognizing the suffering that we experience mutually, but I think it's also trying to move us to a different place where we're not trying to get revenge when we've been wrong. That what we're trying to do is find a way to make reconciliation. And unfortunately, our society is very bent on punishing and very bent on, unfortunately, getting rich off of things that happen. And so, it's poisonous, in my opinion. It's very poisonous, and it will only stop when we, who kind of realize it from a different perspective, begin to say, no, wait a minute, this isn't right, and begin to sort of speak out about, this stuff. And then it'll change. Attitudes will change. I think the third thing it does is when you've been wronged, it allows you to and I've spoke about this in other places around beautiful people like Eve and Moses' core, it allows you to forgive them. And forgiving doesn't mean that you forget or you condone what they did, but it's a way of you letting go of it so you don't carry it around inside of you. Yeah. I remember one of my professors in graduate school and seminary at Harvard said that, and I'm probably paraphrasing, but basically saying that he didn't believe that it was a minister's job to ever participate in the condemnation of someone else. And I like that. And I really respected that. He was a Unitarian minister and taught a class that I took at Harvard Divinity School. And that really came home to me. I realized that that was a powerful teaching. So I've done the same. I've followed that rubric. I won't appear for the prosecution. I don't care what's going on. I won't do it. And there has to be some group, some folks in our society who come from that perspective, that they won't be a part of the prosecution. I think that's so important, you know. I think it goes back to the Buddha and Jesus talking about being nonjudgmental, you know. Very profound. So, at the end of the day, my friend, I hope you find some usefulness in what I have shared today. And I pray that whatever's happening, that it will come to a quick resolve and you will be absolved as much as possible. Because as I said, people are going to believe what they want to believe, no matter what the facts are. So I hope that situation ends quickly for you, and that what I shared with you is some way helpful. Please feel free to contact me personally. And I say that to anyone that I ask a question. If you want to go deeper with that, or you'd like to study with me personally, you can do that by scheduling a session with me on the website, AskSenseiTony.com. Blessings. Blessings to everyone.
You've been listening to Ask Sensei Tony. Please visit our website at AskSenseiTony.com, check out Sensei's books and videos, and become a part of the Dragonfly spiritual lifestyle.